Head.
We're going to move on and do another prospect profile. I wanted to do a free agent profile, but I feel like John, and just to catch you all up, John did a great breakdown, and we've separated these segments on our YouTube channel as well. There will be some posts coming up on Cincy Jungle, also showing these with the media, the multimedia, video, audio, everything for the shows that these were on. But you're repping the hat this week. The UC guard, Luke Kandra, who looks like a promising, probably early day 3 prospect and a guy who has starter potential, definitely. We also, who else did we do? We did Cam Scadaboo. I called him Scadabo, but I did Scadaboo. And who was the other one we did so far, John?
I think Scadaboo was the first.
Yeah, so we've done a few. But those are all archived on our YouTube channel, so go check those out. I think there was one more that I'm omitting at this point right now. But regardless, we've got another one. And this one, if you go back about a month or so when the Bengals season ended, John and I ran through a list of players we were just kind of briefly keeping an eye on as they link to the Bengals, whether that was positional need, talent, various rounds of the draft. And Scadaboo was one of them. And this player is one of them, John. And he is a guy that I know a lot of people like. A lot of people are hoping that he is the guy at number 17. That is Ole Miss defensive lineman Walter Nolen, a versatile guy, a guy who's got a really athletic build. At the combine this week, he mentioned that he kind of idolizes Aaron Donald, but I don't really see Aaron Donald with this guy so much just because the size difference. And, Aaron Donald was between 280, 290, and he was maybe 6 foot, 6'1", something like that. This guy is 6'3" and above 300. So he's a bigger guy, but he uses his body well. He uses his hands well. He's an exciting player. I don't think the ceiling is an Aaron Donald, even though that's kind of where some of these big guys have been drafted. Who was it? Kalijah Cansey, wasn't he drafted, mid-late first round and that sort of thing? A little bit of a different player, but a guy I think that will excite a lot of Bengals fans. I'm going to pull up a video of him here, talk about some stats and that sort of thing. A guy I just like a lot for a variety of reasons, John. I think he's got high potential. I think he brings a position of, obviously a position of need for the Cincinnati Bengals. As I mentioned, he's about 6'3", 305 is what, some of his listed weight is. He's a guy who's just 21. He will turn 22 in the season, I believe. And, just solid build, solid tape. I don't know that he's going to be, Hall of Fame type potential like an Aaron Donald, but I think he can be a very, very nice player for a long time in the NFL, especially if you have a guy around him like a Trey Hendrickson. And we'll look at some clips in just a minute here. But last year, 6.5 sacks, 48 total tackles, 14 tackles for loss, 3 passes defended, and 2 fumble recoveries. Not the Carlos Dunlap guy that knocks down a ton of passes every year, but I mean, he'll get you one every once in a while, but he's just a penetrator guy. He's a guy that sheds blocks really well. And we'll try and, I've slowed some of these down so you can kind of check out some of the things here. But I think a guy that Bengals fans would be very, very excited about. So you look here, he just kind of gets lost in the wash, but makes his way. Tackle for loss. I don't know if that was an actual forced fumble. I don't think it was there. But here he is again. You'll see him kind of come across, get lost in a lot of blocks, and still make the tackle for loss there. This is one of my favorites. Watch him push the guard back on his butt and then make the tackle for loss. This is just an effort play, a sack that, he kind of cleaned up at the end there, but just effort play thanks to some good coverage. Shot off the line there, tackle for loss. You got to like that. And then, of course, here, this is a nice play. He beats the lineman inside and creates a tackle for loss. I don't know if that was actually a safety or not there, to be quite honest with you, but I can pull that back, the film back up there too. But what I like about him, and I saw a little bit of this, not as much with Chris Jenkins Jr., but the ability when he's engaged in a block, and he has played, you can see there, he's played a little bit over right guard and left guard, so two tech, he's done some different stuff there. But it's the shedding of the block, right? You engage in a block and just being able, and this is a must in the NFL. It's a must as a defensive lineman, being able to, once you have kind of your arms on each other, get out of my way and move through. And even when he is double teamed, as you saw in some of those clips, he kind of fights through it and still makes a tackle, still makes a play. I don't see the 15 sack a year potential like you saw with Aaron Donald, but I see a guy that could be very disruptive, a very good supplemental player to a guy like Trey Hendrickson. I see a guy that's strong and tall and athletic. Obviously, we have to see how he tests and everything. There are some odd rumblings that aren't really founded about effort and different things about how much he likes football and that sort of thing. I don't know that any of that is truly grounded, but he's a player I really like. And I think, again, I don't think it's, super all pro potential, but I think you have a solid starter for a long time on the defensive line with this guy. Some people think, all those creative people that like to put the square peg in the round hole think, you can lean him up and play him on edge and that sort of thing. I don't really see that. I see a guy you can kind of just move around on the defensive line, namely in the interior, and have him disrupt plays pretty often.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the potential character concerns that has been kind of trickling around of late. This guy started his career at Texas A&M, and there's some reason to believe that it may be people from Texas A&M that had some things to say about him. So then he transferred to Ole Miss. So that's why the combine is really big for him. He did an interview with the Bengals. Interviews are going to be extremely important, and it's why I think he's kind of on the fringe first round type range, because there may be some unknowns about him. But I think the Aaron Donald comparison, from his words, not ours, obviously, is interesting, right? Because while he is 6'3", I do very much enjoy guys who always play consistently, below the other guy's pads. Like, he rarely loses leverage, which is why, compared to a guy like Derek Harmon, who's projected to be drafted around the same area, he finishes against the run a lot more consistently. He's always
look at that right there. Like, look and get under. Under, like you're saying. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. It's not just leverage. I think he has a pass rush plan, which is something that Duke Tobin actually mentioned for what he looks for edge rushers, which I thought was very promising. And to not just, try to win with, converting speed to power. Obviously, having a bull rush helps, and it keeps offensive linemen on their toes and everything. But knowing what to do with your hands and having counters if, your first move doesn't hit, and having the get off and the athleticism to, again, spark some fear in the opposing offensive lineman. All of that combined leads to someone who can get off blocks pretty frequently, not just in the run game, but also obviously as a pass rusher. He hits a lot of marks in terms of win rate, run stop percentage, didn't miss a lot of tackles. I think at the Senior Bowl, he weighed in just under 300, like in the 295 range. So then maybe where he weighs in this week, he's not going to test, unfortunately. I think he mentioned that he needs to clean some things up, but obviously he'll test at the pro day and get some numbers in there. But athleticism testing is huge. For defensive linemen, something the Bengals should definitely prioritize. But he definitely looks like an athlete on film who has quality production. He was a 5-star recruit coming out, and the Bengals have drafted a 5-star recruit pretty much every single draft since Zach Taylor has gotten here in these early rounds. Doesn't have a ton of big game experience, but he obviously played in the SEC, so he played against really high-quality opponents. I would say that using all that into this argument, I would put him on right now a short list for likely targets for the Bengals with 17th overall, because we know that they're not just going to add one defensive tackle this offseason for agency. It needs to be a heavy position of need that they need to address and continue to throw investment in. And if he falls to 17 and they're okay with his character, I would say that he's someone that they're probably going to have their eyes locked in on.
Yeah, I agree with you. Depending on what happens with BJ Hill, the Bengals need to, and we've talked about this so many times, it's nauseating, but they have to find some semblance of a recreation of what they had back in 21 and 22 with DJ Reader, 21 namely, DJ Reader, BJ Hill, and Larry Ogunjobi. And let's say BJ Hill is no longer in that mix. If you have hits or somewhat of hits on McKinley Jackson, Chris Jenkins, and you bring him into the fold and he is a hit, you all of a sudden have something that looks like a pretty nice interior rotation on that defensive line. More on some things that I'm going to close the show with, but there appears to be also additional value in rounds 2 and 3 for an edge rusher, an edge defender. So let's say the Bengals get Nolen in the first. Let's say they go edge rusher in the second or third, and you don't have BJ Hill anymore, who's been a productive player, obviously, for the Bengals, but you think you can get more out of Chris Jenkins Jr. this year and McKinley Jackson this coming year. You have Nolen in the fold. Let's say you have a nice supplemental pass rusher. You keep Trey Hendrickson. All of a sudden, that defensive line looks a lot different in a good way than the past couple of years.
Yep. They need to essentially have these goals where, like, Chris Jenkins, if he's projected to be a starter, you probably didn't do enough in free agency in the draft. If Miles Murphy doesn't have some competition to be a starter on the edge opposite Trey Hendrickson, I think he kind of lacked an investment there. So I think the pieces that they have right now are good to really round out the position group. And, obviously they're going to make some more moves to kind of cut some weight there. But Nolen would be, I think, a potential game changer for sure. I think there's still some things he needs to clean up. He's still really young. He only 3 years in college, but like, these guys go off the board for a reason, right? Their ceiling is through the roof, and I think his floor is, I think, higher than maybe some would give him credit for. So for a defensive line that needs to kind of rebuild and retool, I think he's a potential foundational piece for sure.
Yeah, and you mentioned one of his best strengths. I mean, he sheds blocks really, really well, but that upward, that using that height and still being able to get under an offensive lineman, and none of those, if you watch those clips, none of those exemplify that more than on that left guard. I forget what team it was, but he planted him on his ass and took out the running back on that. So I am curious about how he tested the pro day. There are a couple of smaller questions. How good is the get off and some pass rushing techniques, and like you said, some of the character stuff, which I don't know how grounded that is, but a player that I think most Bengals fans would be pretty stoked about if they picked him at number 17, especially considering how many players they need, how many things they need to retool on the defensive side of the ball. Just a solid player. And I know solid maybe isn't what you get you out of your seat at number 17, but I see a long-term NFL productive starter out of Walter Nolen.
I would 100% agree. And even if he doesn't hit that insane potential, if he's a quality starter, hit some doubles in the first round. That's the hope of the Marius Mims. Even if he isn't the Pro Bowler that Duke Tobin has now been on record for saying he could be in year 2, I think the athleticism, the upside that Mims has will give him a really good chance of being just a player that you can build around. And I think Nolen has the production and the athleticism and the tape, all three combined, to be one of their better defensive linemen that they've drafted in recent years.